Hello, my name is Kevin Bishop, and I want to welcome you to tonight's Tele-Town Hall with Senator Lindsey Graham. We will get started in just a few minutes, but before we do, we have a few housekeeping items I want to go over. If you were on the call tonight and the question you had for Senator Graham was not asked, you can go to his website and submit your written question, or you can call one of his offices. To get the information on that, if you want to go to his website to submit a written question, go to lgraham.senate.gov, G-O-V. Again, that is lgraham, G-R-A-H-A-M, .senate.gov, G-O-V. Then just click on Contact and email your message to Senator Graham. Or if you prefer to call one of his offices, you can find the most convenient number also on his website. Click on the contact and office locations, and you will find the phone number for 6 offices across South Carolina, as well as his Washington office. Finally, one other note. If you have a question tonight on tonight's Tele-Town Hall, which will begin in just one moment, push *3 on your phone. Again, *3. That will put you in line to ask a question on this call tonight. With that, I will turn the floor over to Senator Graham to make an opening statement, and then we'll get to your questions.
Well, thank you, Kevin. So I'd like to take as many questions as possible, have about an hour. There's so much going on, I really don't know where to start. So just been an eventful couple of weeks, and let's start with a couple items. Number one, the gun safety bill. I voted for legislation that I thought made sense to me. That would make it easier to keep guns out of the hands of people who are unstable. It had money to harden schools. Schools are not as safe as they could be. So these are all grant programs. It didn't create any federal law. It allowed money to go to schools for grants to protect the school. It increased the information and background check systems for minors from 16 to 20. That was a Dillon Root problem. South Carolina led the way after the AME church massacre by getting juvenile records that involve mental health issues into the background check system. So we have some money for states to do that if they choose. $750 million was made available to help mental health programs. All 50 states are eligible. There are 19 states that have protective orders. They're called red flag laws. Those states are eligible for the grant. Only if they have certain due process rights. You have to have due process before you take the weapon and after you take it. Any of you in law enforcement have family members in law enforcement. Every day, people are involuntarily committed in the country because they're a danger to themselves or others. And there are systems throughout the country that allow courts to intervene before it's too late. One of the common themes of all these shootings is a lot of disturbed people exhibiting signs of irrational behavior, and nobody acted. The Cruz guy in Parkland who shot up the Parkland High School in Florida had 30 visits from the cops. The Uvalde shooter was known to be very strange and was called the school shooter. That was his nickname on a website that he visited. So we got to do something about keeping guns out of the hands of unstable people. I'm a proud gun owner. I own an AR-15. I was in the reserves, and I bought a weapon with a seal of my reserve unit on it. We didn't take anybody's guns. We didn't confiscate weapons. We didn't change federal law in any way. And this bill only applies to people who have been convicted of crimes or have been adjudicated mentally unstable. And there's a lot of money in here to harden schools. It made sense to me. And I think we struck a balance between lawful gun ownership and dealing with a public safety problem, which is schools being attacked by unstable people with weapons. With anything we can do to stop that, I think we should do. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. What does that mean? In 1973, the Supreme Court said that there was a constitutional right to an abortion. It was a made-up right. There's nothing in the Constitution saying you have a right to an abortion. There's nothing in the Constitution saying the federal government has the exclusive authority to regulate abortion. This was one of those decisions by judges that created a right, not in writing, and it was a constitutional overreach. And the Alito opinion struck this down. It was wrong when it was decided. The states before 1973 had a right to define when life begins and to regulate abortion as they saw fit. So I think this is a constitutional reset. Each state can decide this issue based on the voters of the states, and elected officials now are involved, and the ballot box is the place, I think, to talk about things like life. So this was a constitutional reset. The court also issued an opinion. There was a law in New York that said to have a gun permit to carry a gun outside of your home, you have to tell the state, the government, justify why you need to do that. Well, the court said, wait a minute, a constitutional right exists to own a firearm for self-protection. That's the basis of it. And the state, they got it backwards in New York. The state has to have a reason to limit your gun ownership. No gun owner has to convince the state to have a right to carry a weapon outside the home for personal protection. There are plenty of gun regulations on the books. There are background checks that are required. Felons can't own guns. You can't own bazookas. So there's plenty of laws out there, but it is a constitutional right, and it was a big overreach in New York. Today, the Supreme Court ruled that a coach praying on a football field by himself before the game or after the game is not establishing a religion under the Constitution, that behavior is protected by the free exercise of religion clause in the First Amendment and freedom of speech, which was common sense to me. To say that a football coach praying by themselves on a football field in the presence of players is the government establishing a religion was ridiculous, and the court got that right. For the last 50 years, many of us have been working out there to have a constitutional reset, to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was a mistake to begin with. It was a power grab by unelected judges. Many of you remember the Kavanaugh hearings where I stood up for Kavanaugh. I thought he was a fine man, and they were trying to ruin his life. You can remember, the older people on the phone like me can remember Clarence Thomas, what they tried to do to him. Alito, they tried to call him a bigot. So since I've been around, I've been fighting for conservative judges being on the bench. We've done this through the constitutional process. This effort by the left to burn down the country has to stop. They want to pack the court because they don't like this decision, which would destroy the Supreme Court. They want to abolish the Electoral College, which would mean California and New York would pick the president. Small states like South Carolina, mid-sized states would probably be dealt out of the mix if you went to the popular vote. They want to federalize elections under the Constitution. States run elections. They want to federalize elections under H.R. 1 to institute ballot harvesting and do away with voter ID laws. They want to make D.C. a state and Puerto Rico a state to shift the balance of power. And I'm going to fight as hard as I can to keep the constitutional systems in place that have check and balances. And the left just wants an outcome here, and they don't care how they get it. So we live in tough, dangerous times. Appreciate you being on the phone call. Don't forget about Ukraine. If we don't stop Putin there, he'll keep going. The Iranians are trying to build a nuclear weapon, not a power plant. I worry about our friends in Israel. Our military has been through hell for the last 20 years. Our leaving Afghanistan not only was dishonorable, it was a disaster. We have a broken southern border. Every month we have more illegal immigrants than the month before. We're on pace for 2 million this year coming in illegally, which would be an all-time high and then some. So policy matters, and I'll be glad to take your questions, and appreciate you being on the phone call.
Okay, again, if you have a question for Senator Graham, press *3. Our first question, we're going to go to Angela from Charleston, Angela Pike. Angela, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, ma'am. Angela, go ahead with your question.
Senator Graham, you spoke about due process with red flag laws, and my concern is, you have parents being called domestic terrorists when they go to school board meetings. You have, people just, what in your bill is going to protect someone from being singled out for expressing their right to be concerned about their children, or just keeping someone from having their gun taken away for no reason at all. It seems to me like this is done away with due process, and we have to prove innocence before guilt. Can you correct me in my thinking about the way this bill is working, or did y'all do anything to try to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, it's a really good question. So 19 states have red flag laws. South Carolina is not one of them. But we have mental health programs here to try to get more money into schools to identify these people before it's too late. But, Angela, I've been a lawyer before I got in politics. Every day, people in South Carolina are involuntarily committed to mental health institutions or taken off the streets because they're a danger to themselves or others. That happens every day. People get dementia, people have mental health problems, and cops deal with this every day. So there's a process, even in South Carolina law, to go to a judge. And you have to make the case. The burden's on the government, not the person, not the gun owner. You have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the person is exhibiting dangerous behavior to himself or others. Then once the gun is taken, within 7 days, you have a hearing to maintain the guns being taken, where there's a full trial. The person's given a lawyer. The government has to prove that the gun should be withheld. The burden's on the government. You get to confront the witnesses against you. You get to present evidence. So there is due process, but there is no federal red flag law. This is a grant program, and the states that don't have red flag laws also get money to help with mental health. One thing in common for most of these shootings is people disturbed. People in the community know it, and, it was too late before they acted. So I do believe you need robust due process to take someone's weapon. But again, every day people are committed involuntarily for different reasons, and this grant program doesn't establish any federal program to take somebody's gun. Red flag states have to have due process before and after the taking. It has to be a judge. That's in the bill. You have to comply with the 4th and 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment before you can get the grant money. So that's how the bill protects due process. It's written as part of the grant.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for your question, Angela. Our next question we're going to go to is Sayeed, who has I think I may be pronouncing that right. Sayeed has a question about gas. Sayeed, are you on the line?
I am. Senator Graham, thanks for taking my question. My question deals directly with the federal gas tax. What are you doing to help suspend or eliminate that tax so South Carolinians aren't feeling the burden at the gas pumps? I personally have 2 friends from Carolina that have suspended their trucking operations simply over the price of fuel. It's just gotten out of hand, and I know too many South Carolinians here in the Midlands and in the PD and along the coast that they are directly impacted by this. So what are you doing to help us out with this?
Okay, number one, the 18.9 cents federal gas tax on a gallon of gas is used to build highways. And we send money back to the states, but we also build the federal highway system. If you eliminate the gas tax, then you don't have any money to build new roads and bridges. So that's not a good solution. If you live in South Carolina, we need more roads and bridges, not less. So eliminating the gas tax destroys the ability to deal with a growing country, particularly a growing state like South Carolina. Why is gas so high? When Trump left office, it was $2.38 a gallon. We were energy independent. He opened up 10 million acres to energy exploration, 5 million on the land and 5 million in the Gulf Coast. He built the Keystone. He allowed the Keystone pipeline to go forward. He changed a lot of regulations about how we refine gasoline, and we actually produced more oil and gas than we used, and it was at $2.38. When the pandemic hit in 2020, it went to $1.77 because we were all stuck in our house. When Biden took over, it went back to $2.38. What happened between then and now? President Biden has taken 10 million acres off out of use. He shut down the Keystone Pipeline. He declared war on fossil fuels in this country. And it's so hard to produce oil and gas in this country. We went from energy independence to begging the Saudis and the OPEC nations to produce more. This is a supply and demand problem. What's happened here is the economy is coming back after COVID. People are getting back to work, and we shut off energy production in our country. We're more reliant on fossil fuels from other nations, and nothing's going to change until you change policies here at home. The oil and gas companies are not to blame. The policies of the Biden administration, in my view, took us from energy independence to where we are today, and relieving the gas tax creates another problem. You won't have any money to build roads and bridges. So what am I doing? I'm begging the Biden administration to work with us to find a way to drill for oil and gas. But I do believe climate change is real. I don't think we need to destroy the economy because of that. You can't help the environment by destroying the economy. I believe in clean energy, but we just don't have enough energy from windmills and solar to power America. And we're going to electric vehicles in the next 25 years, 20 years. So on the transportation side, that begins to correct itself. Between now and then, we need to produce as much oil and gas as possible to lower gas prices, but not to be dependent on Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Hey, did that take care of your question, sir?
It did. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Very good question.
Our next question, we're going to go to Fred from Lake Wylie. Fred from Lake Wylie. Are you on the line, Fred? Hold on one second. Fred, go ahead with your question, please, sir.
Senator, what can we do to make sure that we take back the House and the Senate in November? And I know the words vote, but what can we do to ensure we take it over and to hell with these Democrats?
Okay. Well, there may be a few
Democrats. Excuse me for swearing.
That's all right. That's okay. There may be some Democrats on the phone. You know, they're Americans too. So here's what I would say. I hope we do take back the House and the Senate. Let me tell you why. You know, it's not that the Republican Party is perfect. We're certainly not. But the Democratic Party seems to be hell-bent, I'll cuss too, on changing America. It would be a disaster to expand the number of judges on the Supreme Court because you don't like a ruling.
You're right on that.
Every time you change power, do we change the number of judges? The court becomes a political football. From South Carolina's point of view, it's not in our interest to make D.C. and Puerto Rico a state. It dilutes our power. Electoral college allows states like us to have a say who's going to be president. They want to change all of that stuff. They want to federalize elections. What can we do? Like Georgia changed their laws to make it harder to cheat when it comes to mail-in voting. I think Arizona did. So this is going to be one heck of an election. I think the winds are blowing strongly in Republicans' favor, not because we're all of a sudden great. It's because the Joe Biden that ran in 2020 is not the Joe Biden that's governing today. I hate to say it. I work with Democrats when I can. I worked on an infrastructure bill, $1.2 trillion. It was a small bill compared to what they wanted, but it was $1 billion for roads and bridges in South Carolina. I don't mind finding ways to help states to make schools safer and keep guns out of the hands of unstable people. But this agenda that they've been pushing is destroyed energy independence. It's one of the most radical agendas in my lifetime. So 2 things. You got to get voting systems that are honest. That's important. And the second thing is what you said to begin with. People got to vote. And here's the question. If we take back the House and the Senate, here's my challenge to Democrats throughout the country. If you want to find common ground, I'm ready to work with you. If you want to transform the country and make it a socialist nation, I'll be your worst enemy.
Thank you, sir. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
Fred, for that question, sir. We appreciate it. We're going to go. Our next question is to Ron. Ron has a question about first responders. Ron, are you on the line?
Hello. I am,
Ron,
sir.
Go ahead with your question.
Senator Graham, just want to thank you first off for all your service. I think you've been a senator as long as I can remember, and I'm 52. But I appreciate
You've been
all
around
you've
a
done
while.
for us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. But I wanted to ask you a question about our first responders. It seems that an underlying issue there, and I know everything hasn't come out with the shooting in Texas and different places like that, but it seems like there's a lot of question marks about our first responders having the training and the capacity to do what needs to be done in a lethal situation. I know that they are the first on the scene, and they put their lives on the line every day, and thank God for them. But is there a way that we can shore up our first responders' reaction time and help keep travesties like what happened in Texas from happening, and also just along with the red flag laws? I just want to let you know and appreciate what y'all doing to protect the South Carolinians' rights. I have a license to concealed weapons permit. Well able to carry it and all, but I don't take advantage of it. But I appreciate all you're doing, and I listen to your response.
Thank you. Well, one, I'm a responsible gun owner too. So let's talk about Uvalde. I mean, let's be honest with each other. The kid, and I hate to say that, but the 18-year-old who went in and killed these other kids was bringing dead cats to school. All of these cases have a common theme. People in school thought the guy was strange. One teacher said, he's the one I worried the most about. We got to have systems inside of every school in the country that when you detect this behavior, you intervene before it's too late. So part of this bill that we just passed will create mental health programs inside of schools. Number two, most people who have mental problems wind up going to the emergency room, and they get looked at and passed on. So we're creating mental health centers, community-based mental health centers, kind of like outpatient centers, so the cops and the first responders can take these people to a community mental health center where they will have somebody assigned to them, and they just won't release them back out on the streets. We have veterans courts in South Carolina where we're trying to help veterans who have PTSD issues. So mental health is the common problem here, and our nation needs to up our game. When somebody has a mental health episode, they usually wind up going to the emergency room, and cops are not trained to be mental health workers. So we got to break that chain. Have community health centers rather than an emergency room. Have people in schools that can identify these people early. When you respond, apparently you had 19 officers outside the classroom for over an hour. That's just unacceptable. We lost an officer in Spartanburg, Officer Aldridge. Cops are heroes in my book. This young man was killed in a domestic violence episode, so pray for his family. But what I've tried to do from this is learn, and here's what I've learned, that we've got to have alternatives to the emergency room to treat people who are mentally unstable. We've got to get more emphasis on kids that are showing these problems early on in school. When a guy's bringing a bunch of dead cats to school, somebody needs to talk to them, right? All right, training.
Absolutely.
I'm going to introduce legislation to get the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense to create certification programs. There are a lot of retired military people, probably on this phone, that are trained in firearms. But what I want to do is get the people to go to a training program where you actually train for a couple of weeks on how to handle school shootings, get a certificate so that you're ready to go, and be a resource to schools throughout the country. It's just not schools, though. Mental health problems are prevalent in this country, and unstable people with guns not only go to schools, they go to other places. But a schoolhouse should be harder to get into and shoot somebody than the Capitol. The future of our country is in those schoolhouses. The future of America is our young people, and we need to do a better job protecting them, and I will do anything within reason to do that. I will respect the Second Amendment. I'm a proud gun owner, but there are things we can and should do. And what happened there in Uvalde was system failure at every turn. They had knowledge that this guy was crazy and didn't do anything about it. And when that bad day came, there was just a breakdown of handling the situation. And if we don't learn from this, we're crazy as a country. And I'm hoping that this bill will help.
I appreciate that, Senator. And it does. I appreciate that, and I thank the Lord we got leadership that doesn't react off of knee-jerk responses, but really examines the situation and looks for solutions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. A high compliment. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Ron. Our next question, we're going to go to Don in Anderson. Don, you're on the line. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead. Go ahead with your question, Don.
Senator, I'd like to know, with all those immigrants, illegal immigrants coming along on the border down there, when they bust them to these different states and all, who designates where they go? Does the governor?
That's a great question.
Does anybody?
That's a great
question. Looks like to me, if they send some to Kamala's house and some to Biden's house, Schumer's house and Pelosi's house, they load them up in those areas. I think they get interested in what's coming across the border. Who controls where they go?
Okay, the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas does this. So what's happening here? Pray for the Border Patrol. Their job is to protect the border from terrorists and from drug dealers. Well, now they're processing illegal immigrants. We had over 240,000 people cross illegally last month. Every month is a new record. We're on track to have 2 million people come across this border legally. The Biden policies are not working. How did Trump go to the lowest amount of legal crossings in 45 years in December of 2020? The asylum claims. People come here and claim asylum. They got a bad deal where they live. Under our law, the way Biden's doing it, once they make the claim, they release them into the country. You never hear from them again. Here's what Trump did. He said, if you got an asylum claim, we're going to make you wait in Mexico until your hearing comes up, and there's a backlog of about 4 years. Guess what? People stop making the claims. They're playing the system. We need to build a wall. We need to change our asylum laws because remaining in Mexico did work, and when Biden changed that, he basically is there's a tsunami of people coming because they think once you get here, you never leave. If you don't change our laws, this never gets better. As to where they go, this is Mayorkas, the DHS director. And, you had the governor of Texas sending them to Washington. I thought that was a brilliant idea. The Border Patrol is being overrun, and it's like hundreds of dollars a day to take care of a minor illegal immigrant. It's just billions of dollars we're spending. The trafficking, the drug traffickers and the human traffickers they're making a ton of money. The border is completely open and broken, and these kids coming into this country, and only God knows what happens to them on the way down. This is just a terrible situation, and I hope Republicans take back the Congress so we can focus on it. And President Trump, whether you like him or not, got this part right. We had a secure border, and we need to regain control of our border. As to where they go in this country is the DHS secretary, and I think one of the big issues on the ballot in 2022 is a broken border, and I'd end with this. I worry about terrorists coming from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is now in the hands of Taliban. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are coming back. I worry that a group of these people are going to come through our border because it's so broken, and there'll be another attack on our country. This is a national security nightmare. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for that question, Don. Our next question, we're going to go to David Aiken. David, are you on the line? David?
Sir, you mean, David Lindsay from Aiken, South Carolina? Yep.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Senator, with everything that's gone on since Uvalde, and now that this, the gun control bill, obviously the most recent one that's passed, right now, we all know, first off, the only thing that's going to stop school shootings is hardening the schools and resource officers, period. Nothing else is going to stop it. 1. 2, the red flag laws. As far as South Carolina, I can't ask a question about any other state and don't really care. I live here. But how are we going to stop the red flag laws from being abused? Because that's the first thing that'll happen. They'll get on everybody, even from a big scale. They'll find them an NRA list or something else and start calling, reporting, saying everybody's a school shooter, and it'll start this vicious cycle, let alone the more personal relationships, ex-girlfriends, co-workers that are mad at you, whatever. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Right. Well, it's a really good question. Number one, there are laws in this country. You just can't be taken off the streets by the cops. Again, people, David, are involuntarily committed every day in South Carolina because they have some dementia. They can't, maintain themselves. Some are mentally unstable, and judges put them in a position where they're not dangerous to themselves or others. That's just a reality. In Aiken or every other town, you can go talk to the cops. So what do you do when you run into one of these people that you think is going to blow? What you want to do is act before it's too late. So all of these laws, the red flag laws, we don't have one in South Carolina, but we do have involuntary commitment procedures. They have one thing in common. To deny somebody their freedom or their gun ownership, the government has to prove the case in a court of law. And the red flag laws that I think works the best are when the cops make the application of the judge, not a coworker. There is no federal red flag law. There is no taking your guns in this bill. The House bill passed by Nancy Pelosi wanted to confiscate weapons, ban buying a gun until you're 21, doing away with magazines, all this gun control stuff. You're right. The goal is to keep the gun. I own an AR-15. The AR-15 in my hands is not a problem. It's not the gun itself. It's the person owning the gun. If somebody's unstable, I want to get them help and stop them from killing themselves or somebody else. Due process is absolutely required. Before the taking, through an emergency order, and after the taking, you have to be able to confront the witnesses against you. You're able to present evidence. The burden's on the state. After the Parkland shooting in Florida, Florida passed a red flag law with Rick Scott, who's a great conservative. And in Florida, there have been 9,800 interventions in a state of 25 million. And I've looked at some of them, and most of these things just make good common sense. But you got to be on your guard. You're absolutely right. You don't want to have a system where your political views can be used against you. I promise you that in this grant program, all states are eligible for the grant money, but a red flag law state has to comply with the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment before they get the grant. It is part of it. And we don't have a red flag law in South Carolina. They have one in New York. They have 19 states. All of them require a judge to issue the order. Some of them allow co-workers. Most of them allow cops. But I didn't want to federalize red flag laws. And in our state, we don't have one.
That's the way I'm hoping it stays, to be honest with you. And to your point about the guns,
you have a reason to be concerned. Listen, I've been a lawyer, I've been a prosecutor, defense attorney. You got to give. These things can be abused. There's two things you're trying to do here. This is a great question. You're trying to prevent one of these guys from acting before it's too late. Suicide rates go down when it's done right. But at the end of the day, I own an AR-15. It's not the gun. It's the person owning the gun, right? And if we can keep the guns out of the hands of somebody who is just going through a bad time, that's a good thing. But you got to do it in a way that it can't be used and abused. And the grant program that we don't have a federal red flag law, and I don't think we ever will, requires constitutional due process. That's part of the grant. You can't get the money unless you comply with the constitutional provisions.
Okay. Well, you're right.
Thanks.
I always tell my kids, it's the gun's no more responsible for the shooting than the fork is for making me fat. And the thing about it is it's true. Yeah. And the thing about it is,
that's right. I got a bunch of guns. I'm not hurting anybody with them.
Good to hear.
I like shooting guns. I like shooting guns. I like to hunt.
A bunch of us do.
That's right. And we're not going to hurt anybody. But I think people like me and you need to let the cops have the tools they need when they see somebody is really out of hand here. And trust me, you live in Aiken, I live in Seneca, I guarantee you there are people that are going through some tough times that need some help. And in this country, if you got mental health problems, we just sort of ignore you, and we got to do better.
Thank you for your question, David. Our next question, we're going to go to Liz in Aiken. Liz, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead, Liz.
Yes, Mr. Graham, good evening. I wanted to ask you a question. Do you believe or not that there was illegal voting activity in the last presidential election?
Yes, but it didn't change the results in my view. There is always no good out there when it comes to voting, particularly in Georgia. I think they lost control of absentee ballots. You know, you got to have, when you show up in South Carolina to vote, you got to have an ID, right? Well, you got to have a system through the mail that is just as strong as in-person voting, and they didn't have that. But no, I voted to certify the election, and I think the key for conservatives is to take these systems that failed us in certain ways and improve them. But I'm not going to get on this phone call and say that, you know, the election was stolen, because I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't believe it was stolen?
No, ma'am. I believe there were irregularities, but I believe Biden's president, and the best way to make sure he ain't president. And I hope Trump runs again. And I talk to him all the time. I know a lot of people don't want him to run. I thought he's a heck of a president and all the things that mattered. You know, we had a secure border. We defeated ISIS. We're energy independent. I don't know if he's going to run or not, but we got a lot of candidates on our side that are going to be really. We're blessed on the Republican side. We're really a large group of people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Liz. Our question, we're going to go to Eileen in Georgetown. Eileen, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, please, ma'am.
Good evening, Senator. Recently in Georgetown, we have created a task force concerning drug issues. On a weekly basis, we're burying all of our drug-addicted children. And I recently, in the last 2 years, have had 2 grandparents that have committed suicide because they were overwhelmed with dealing with addicted children and their grandchildren. And they couldn't take it anymore. What do we have to do in South Carolina to strengthen the laws against the dealers instead of having a welcome wagon set up for them? Because, quite frankly, all jail is a car wash. They go in, get a bath, get food, and they're out on the highway dealing drugs again. And we can't take it anymore. The task force is set up in 3 categories. Prevention, which is going to intervene in schools and trying to teach against why they don't do drugs. The other is recovery for the existing addicts, and the most critical is that we have laws where the police can take them off the street and keep them off the street. And with our sentencing right now, our sentencing just says, oh, the judge goes up, well, you're having a bad day today, go out and sell some more drugs. Well, right now, fentanyl is deadly. You might as well hand the drug dealer a gun and blow the kid's brain out. Because that's what's happening.
To me, that's attempted murder.
It is a murder. Drugs or a slow death, fentanyl is a quick one.
Yeah. Where do you live?
Georgetown, South Carolina. I'm an old Republican from Senator Thurman's days.
Okay.
And I told somebody I'm in the 4th quarter of my life, and I'd be damned if I am going to go out lightly.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's a good attitude. The number of drugs coming into the country, like illegal immigrants, is an all-time high. The Biden change in policy not only led to an explosion of illegal immigrants, it also has led to an explosion of illegal drugs. Fentanyl comes from China. Doesn't come from Georgetown. It comes through the southern border, and drug dealers put it in all kind of drugs to get people addicted. It's extremely addictive, and just a touch on your finger can kill 20, 50 people. So I'm working with Tom Cotton to increase penalties for distribution of fentanyl to make it, basically to me it's attempted murder. If you're selling somebody a fentanyl-laced drug, it's just as if you were trying to push them off a cliff. So one, increase penalties. There's state laws and there's federal laws. Drug trafficking laws at the federal level, and mandatory minimums. State law, they really don't have mandatory minimums. So how do you deal with this? Stop the flow by controlling your border. You can stop the amount of drugs coming across the border. Trump did it. I was there when he did it. Turn off the spigot, turn on the prosecutions, and educate kids what you're getting yourselves into. If you ever get a hold of a fentanyl-laced tablet, chance of you using more goes up exponentially. It is so addictive. And the number of deaths among young people, the leading cause of death among young people in America today is drug overdose. And it's directly related to our policies at the border. And we need to change our laws when it comes to fentanyl. And Senator Cotton from Arkansas and I are trying to do that. And if we get in charge as Republicans, I'm going to make sure we vote on this bill. I can't promise you it will pass, but I got a bill to dramatically increase sentences for people who deal in fentanyl.
Well, what can you do to help McMaster tighten up our laws in South Carolina?
That's Henry's a great governor.
Thing, but I'm sure that you've got his ear.
Well, this task force is probably getting a grant from the federal government, trying to improve through the Attorney General's office, trying to give resources to local cops to work with the DEA. Anybody on 95 or 85, any counties that touch these interstates, the amount of drugs going up and down 95 is just unbelievable, and it comes back to the border. So, one, deterrence. You increase the penalties, people are less likely to do it. And on the fentanyl side, our laws don't reflect the danger of this drug, but the amount of drugs are coming through a broken border. These policies at the border benefit drug cartels and human traffickers, and it's sad and it's dangerous. And if we get in charge as Republicans, I hope we'll put solutions on the table, and I intend to do that if we do get in charge.
Thank you for that question, Eileen. Very much appreciate that question. Our next question is we're going to go to Van in Goose Creek. Van, are you on the line?
I certainly am.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Senator, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do need to go back to this red flag law business again, and I understand South Carolina does not yet have one. Of course, the concern there is that we'll be blackmailed into getting one, or some kind of federal money that we are due will not be given to us. So I know how that works, too. But the other thing is, though, what happens if somebody is caring for an individual with perhaps dementia or some other possible mental trouble? What additional, and they're in the family, what additional burden is that going to place on the gun owner if it's the idea to deny access and you say it's not the gun owner but that individual you're worried about? How do you get around the fact that that individual is going to have to take extra precautions beyond what they do now? In the case of Uvalde, that was tragic, but this guy acted strange, but nobody reported it, and he was able to go in and buy a rifle to do the carnage that he did. Now, there's nothing that's going to restrict that in a red flag law.
Well, let me take a shot at that. Number one, Florida has a red flag law, and Indiana, they're Republican states. South Carolina doesn't. There's nothing in this bill that requires the state to get red flag laws to get the grants. Matter of fact, we went the opposite way. Every state has the same opportunity to get the money. There are mental health programs in South Carolina that are money can be used to help mental health programs, even though we don't have a red flag law. So we made sure that mental health programs were eligible for the grant, not just red flag states. Let's just be honest with each other here. Red flag laws in like Florida. There have been 9,800 interventions. You worry that somebody, some coworker or family member, will accuse you of doing something out of revenge. You worry that maybe, your political views can be used against you. All I can say is in the states with these laws, and we don't have one, the grant requires compliance with the constitutional provisions of the 4th, the 5th, and the 14th Amendment. What do those mean? Your gun can't be seized unless you have a chance to confront the witnesses against you, call people in support of your side of the story. You have a right to counsel, and the government has the burden to prove to the judge that you're a danger to yourself or others in a competent court of law. And I promise you, every day in South Carolina, there are people out there that are involuntarily committed for different reasons. But if you got a family member with dementia, it is really difficult. It's really difficult that they're going to leave the stove on and burn down the house, that they'll go outside and get lost. They got guns in the house. Maybe they'll hear something. And the problem of Alzheimer's and dementia is just an enormous problem. I want to put more resources into trying to get, solutions to this to the best we can. But in terms of this gun bill, it doesn't take anybody's guns. It doesn't deny people the right to buy a gun based on their age. It puts into the system juvenile convictions that are related to mental health. It gives money to schools to harden the site. It gives money to community health centers to deliver better care than the emergency room. And it creates grants to help with mental health programs, red flags, but also other programs. And nobody can use the money unless their system has the constitutional protections I just outlined. But one thing I can say as a gun owner, I'll say it again, I own guns. It's not the gun, it's the person with the gun. And there's a real problem in America. There's some people out there that, like this guy in Uvalde, if we'd had some kind of system, maybe they could have got to him before it was too late. If this helps one person be stopped, that would be a great thing. But nobody is going to lose their gun rights because of this bill. It only applies to people who have been convicted of a violent offense in court or have been adjudicated by a judge to be mentally ill. If you're not in those two categories, this grant program doesn't apply to you.
Well, let me just follow up with one other thing, then, if I may, given that statement, and that is, how about poor resources rather than in the red flag laws? Let's double down on the money that you're going to spend on that and put it into getting qualified mental health people, because, as you may or may not know,
absolutely
there's
right.
a shortage of that.
You
There's not enough in
nailed
South Carolina to go around just for disturbed kids in school. You've got guidance counselors that are not qualified to be guidance counselors, and they go to free schools one each time a week.
If I had to pick between the two ideas, I'd pick what you said. South Carolina doesn't have a red flag law. It's up to South Carolina if you ever want to have one. But I do know this. The money that is in this program can be used for the things you just said, to beef up the mental health abilities inside the school before it's too late. I'd rather have more people trained in the mental health arena than courts and than red flag laws. I think that's where the rubber meets the road, is when you see people that are having problems, you do something about it. I think this is a mental health issue. And if we don't treat it that way, we're making a huge mistake. So I prefer your solution. I prefer the money going into those programs. But we're leaving that up to the states. And if any state uses the money to beef up their red flag systems, they have to comply with the constitutional due process in the grant. And I think the idea of doing nothing is off the table. The idea of doing something that's smart is what I tried to do. And I think it's smart to put money into these systems. And the red flag approach is one way, but it's not the only way. And I think what we've learned on this phone call is if somebody has a mental health problem, they're more likely not to be dropped off in the emergency room with no follow-on care. And that's leading to a lot of problems in our society. Alzheimer's and dementia, I've got it in my own family. there comes a point in time where you're going to have to take your loved one and put them in some kind of care facility, because if you don't, they're going to burn the house down. And these are things that as society we need to deal with. And I think this bill, in a small way, goes in the right direction. It's a modest bill. It's not a taking people's guns bill. It's not restricting gun ownership bill. It is focusing on hardening schools and mental health. And that made sense to me. And I hope and pray it works, but whether it does or not, we at least ought to try.
Thank you for that question, sir. Our next question is from Dee Dee from Columbia. Dee Dee, you on the line?
Yes, sir, I am, and it's actually Eady.
Oh, I apologize.
Okay.
That's okay. Hey, Senator,
we were
how
close.
are you?
We were close. Yeah, we missed about
I know
one
it. I know it. Sounds absolutely easy to do. Well, anyway, you partially answered my question, but I still would like to ask it if you don't mind. Talking
Sure.
about schools and red flag laws. One of the father of one of the victims of Parkland shooting did an investigation and wrote a book about what everything that led up to that happening, all the failures that led up to that. And one I remember was that the state legislature had allocated monies specifically for school security, hardening schools as they're calling it now. But yet and it was a conservative Republican legislature, but the liberal school board decided to use those dollars for something else. Otherwise, that shooter probably would not have been able to get in that day. And so what assurances do we have that those monies will be used for what they're supposed to be used for? And I'd just like to, on red flag laws, to just have another example. I have a very good friend, strong female. She walked the Appalachian Trail by herself with a gun for her own security. But her boyfriend, who was a professional football player, had traumatic brain injuries and self-medicated through alcohol and drug abuse, threatened her with that gun. And, so I can see there are both two sides. He was self-medicating. He wasn't he was not a mean person,
right.
But yet he was having a problem. So there are times when, for everybody's safety, there needs to be something done. So I appreciate your due diligence of making sure that everybody has due process. But, let's just remember that there sometimes is a bigger picture.
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack that. Let's talk about Parkland. Believe it or not, and I think most people, I take my job seriously. These are important decisions. How do you protect people's Second Amendment rights and deal with the problems that exist in our country in a pervasive fashion? So the Parkland, the Cruz guy, they had a cop. The cop ran away. In Uvalde, they had 19 cops outside the door for an hour. They didn't do it right. So giving money doesn't work unless you get an outcome. So part of the money in this bill is to train people in a fashion to act professionally. That's why I want a certification program for former military members so they can get a certificate and schools can hire them to supplement their security. Having somebody at the door with a gun only works if they know what they're doing. So at Parkland, the resource officer failed. He got fired. 30 visits by the cops to Cruz before he did the shooting. When the shooting happened, everybody in the school knew who it was. They'd called up the FBI twice complaining about this guy. He was threatening to rape women at school, threatening to blow up the school. Uvalde guy had all kind of warning signs. So the common theme here is that there's got to be a system to pick these people up before it's too late, and there has to be due process. That's all I'm trying to say. As to the money, a lot of COVID money was spent on things unrelated to COVID. Every time you put money into the system, the worry is it will be spent on some pet project, not the issue at hand. There's $750 million in this bill, not $750 billion. To get the money from a red flag state, you got to comply with the constitutional due process requirements in the grant. Other states can use the money on mental health programs like we talked about on the call tonight. So the bottom line is I feel very comfortable that the money is going to go to the intended purpose or I wouldn't have voted for it. And if anybody takes this money and uses it for something else, they're going to have hell to pay. Hello?
Eady, does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Senator Graham, I think we have time for one more question if you're good with it. We will go to...
I'll make a quick closing statement. It's been really good. I appreciate all the people calling in.
Absolutely. Our next on the line is Elizabeth from Pawleys Island. Elizabeth, are you on the line?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I am.
Go ahead with your question, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for your years of service. You are a hero representing our state. I have a question about Ukraine, and just from your personal take, where are we going, and what are we going to do?
Good question.
With Putin?
This is really. Thank you for bringing it up. Okay, so we talked about tonight. I'm gonna wrap it up here. We talked about how do we deal with mental health issues surrounding gun ownership. I'm a gun owner. I'm not taking anybody's guns away because somebody else abused a gun. I wouldn't take your car away from you because somebody drove drunk. I own a gun. It's not the gun, it's the person with it. We're trying to find a way to deal with mental health issues that occur over and over again. We're trying to find a way to make schools a hard target, not a soft target, right? When it came to the election, all the claims by the president, who I liked very much and supported and still do, went through a court, and no court granted relief. I just can't overturn an election because I don't like the outcome. You know, Al Gore certified an election in which he lost. We're a rule of law nation, so there's got to be systems in place. You can't overturn an election because somebody claims there was fraud. It has to be proven in some competent venue. So that's the way I am. I'm a rule of law guy. I believe in systems. I worry about people's rights being abused, so that's why you have checks and balances. But I also worry about not doing anything. So, Ukraine. Here's what I worry about in Ukraine. I worry that if Putin gets away with this, invading a sovereign nation, claiming it's his, then China's going to take Taiwan. And you're going to have a world where the rule of gun replaces the rule of law. In 1998, the Ukrainians had the third largest nuclear weapons force in the world. According to the Budapest Memorandum, they turned over their nuclear weapons to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union with a guarantee that Russia would honor their sovereignty. Well, Putin abused that. So who in their right mind in the future will turn over weapons with a promise to guarantee sovereignty? If we don't watch it, we're going to wake up and live in a world of thugs and the rule of gun, not the rule of law. So Putin invaded Russia illegally. He's committing war crimes by the day. He needs to be prosecuted as a war criminal, and I hope the Russian people take him out any way they choose to. Because if he doesn't get stopped in Ukraine, he's announced he has ambitions beyond Ukraine. You could rewrite the map of Europe in the 2022. It's important to have stability in the world. You don't want to be traveling in Europe with a war going on. If China takes Taiwan, they make 90% of all the chips that go into our cars and high-tech industries made in Taiwan. You don't want to give that to China. So we got to live in a world where people obey the law and rules matter. So if Putin gets away with it, he'll keep going. The best way to stop him is into Ukraine. I've been awed and amazed by the ability of the Ukrainians to fight this large Russian army. The least we can do is help them. They're not asking for military boots on the ground. They're not asking for American soldiers to fight their fight. They are asking for the equipment they need to fight back against the Russians. And I know $40 billion is a lot of money, but you pay now or you pay later when it comes to Putin. If somebody could have stopped Hitler in the 1930s, would have saved 50 million lives, because that's what happened in World War II. So Putin is trying to rewrite the map of Europe. The last time we ignored that was when Hitler was roaming Europe. So the best thing to do when you confront illegality and evil is to confront it. Ronald Reagan had that doctrine. This didn't happen when Trump was president. He didn't look for conflicts, but he did present himself in a way that people were afraid to cross him. I want to help President Biden where I can, but it is imperative that the Ukrainian people have the weapons they need and the economic support they need to stop Putin, because if Putin gets away with it in Ukraine, he will not stop. It is in our interest. They're dying by the hundreds and thousands to protect freedom. It took us 7 years to get our freedom. Thank God the French helped us. People talk about freedom, but freedom comes with a heavy price. I promise you this, if you ignore Putin and Ukraine, then you'll wake up one day with Europe in turmoil. China will take Taiwan. Iran will sprint toward a nuclear weapon thinking that we're all talk. So what happens in Ukraine can reset the world in one of two ways: reinforcing the rule of law and democracy, or creating a pathway to anarchy. I will do everything in my power to give the Ukrainians what they need, because when it comes to cost, beating Putin is priceless. You pay now or you pay later. This has been a great phone call. I'll do this more. We've talked about a lot of things tonight. Just leave with this thought. I do believe in our country. I do believe in our state. I hope Republicans win in 2022 to stop this madness. But as long as I'm your senator, we're going to try to do it in a way that will sustain itself, that we're going to have systems that work. We're not going to be a rule of man. We're going to be a rule of law country. We're going to try to make things better for everybody. We're going to deal with problems up front before they get out of control. We're going to respect due process. We're going to adhere to international norms when it comes to bad guys overseas. One thing I've learned from my time in office and traveling throughout the world, there is no substitute for America. If we don't stand up to the bad guys, many times nobody else will. And I take that responsibility seriously. And when it comes to being your senator, I try to educate myself the best I can, find common ground when I must, and fight like hell to keep from losing our country to a socialist path that many people would put us on. Thank you for the phone call. Pray for the folks in Ukraine. Pray for Mr. Aldridge, police officer in Spartanburg, who was deputy, was killed. These are dangerous times, but we're going to make it. We are going to make it. We're going to have an election in 2022. We'll have better systems, and everybody gets a chance to pick their leaders. And just remember this: you can talk to your leaders, and you can pick your leaders, and you can criticize your leaders. There's so many people in the world that can't do that, and that is a blessing. Have a great 4th of July.